Private First Class Amelia Amy Carter had calloused hands and a quiet way about her. She wasn't one for loud talk or swagger. On a dusty training base in rural Georgia, that made her an outsider. The base, Camp Shelby, was a world of men in olive-drab uniforms, their voices rough with ambition and their boots scuffing the red dirt. The year was 1944, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and gunpowder. Young men, all of them dreaming of being heroes, practiced with the tools of war. But Amy wasn't a young man. She was a 22-year-old woman, and to most of them that meant she had no business being there, especially not with the new M1 Bazooka. The Bazooka was the talk of the camp, a powerful new weapon that could knock out a tank. It was a man's weapon, they all said, a heavy tube of steel and wire that fired a rocket with a terrifying roar. The general opinion was that a woman couldn't handle its weight, let alone its recoil. But Amy could. She knew the bazooka better than anyone on the base. Her father had been a tinkerer, a mechanic who taught her how to fix things, to see how parts fit together, and to understand the power of simple machines. The bazooka wasn't magic to her. It was a clever device, and she understood its every nut and bolt. The man who mocked her most was Sergeant Thorne. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a sneer that seemed to be permanently fixed on his face. Thorne saw Amy as a personal insult, a joke in uniform. He was the most experienced bazooka operator on base, and he saw himself as the best. To him, the idea of a woman being an expert on his weapon was a slap in the face. He'd never seen her in action, but he didn't need to. Her gender was all the proof he needed that she was worthless. One humid afternoon, during a live fire exercise, the tension between them came to a head. The officers, including the base commander, were watching. The bazooka team was meant to hit a moving target, a rusted-out car towed by a truck, meant to simulate a German tank. The men went first. A few missed, but Thorne hit his target with a clean shot. A cloud of black smoke rose into the air as the rocket struck home. The men cheered for him. Then it was Amy's turn. Thorne snickered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's see if she can even lift it, boys." Amy ignored him. She steadied herself, the heavy tube resting on her shoulder. Her spotter gave the target a range, and she lined up her shot, her eye calm and focused through the sights. She took a deep breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. There was a whoosh and a loud bang. The rocket flew true, a perfect line of fire heading straight for the target. It hit with a loud crash, tearing through the metal shell of the old car. A direct hit. There was a moment of silence. No one cheered for her. Thorne, his face red with anger, stepped forward. "Lucky shot," he bellowed. She probably closed her eyes and prayed. He didn't stop there. He started to question her training, her knowledge. He claimed the target was an easy one and that she had an unfair advantage. He brought up her gender, making a series of ugly jokes about women and weapons. The other soldiers laughed. Amy stood there, the smoke from her perfect shot still hanging in the air. She didn't say a word. She just lowered the bazooka and walked away, her head held high. But inside, a fire of injustice burned. She had done her job perfectly, yet she was being treated like a fool. She had shown her strength, her skill, and her calm under pressure, but all they saw was a woman who didn't belong. The weight of their scorn was heavier than any bazooka. As she walked back to the barracks, she felt the hot tears sting her eyes. She wasn't crying because of his words, but because of the injustice. It was a feeling she knew well. A woman in a man's world, she had to be twice as good to be seen as half as worthy. But she wasn't one to give up. The humiliation only strengthened her resolve. She would prove them wrong, no matter the cost. She would prove to them that the true tool of victory wasn't just the bazooka, but the person who wielded it. The quiet strength within her was about to become a powerful force. The next few days were a living nightmare for Amy. Thorne and his friends made her life miserable. They'd leave her tools scattered, hide her gear, and whisper insults behind her back. At mealtime, no one wanted to sit with her. She ate alone, staring at her plate, the sounds of laughter and friendly conversation feeling a million miles away. The loneliness was a cold blanket that settled over her shoulders. She felt like a ghost, a person in uniform that everyone pretended wasn't there, but she wasn't completely alone. An older officer, Captain Miller, a man with a graying mustache and kind eyes, had seen the whole thing with Thorne. He hadn't intervened, but he had watched her carefully. He saw the way she handled the bazooka, the way she lined up her shot, and the way she held her head high in the face of Thorne's taunts. He saw her quiet strength. He was a veteran of the Great War, and he knew that bravado didn't win battles. Skill did. One evening, as Amy was cleaning her bazooka, her hands moving with a practiced ease, Captain Miller walked up to her. He didn't say much at first. He just stood there watching her work. She didn't look up. "That's a good weapon, Private," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "But it's only as good as the person holding it." Amy nodded, not looking at him. "Yes, sir." "You know, I once knew a fella who was a mechanic," the captain continued, almost to himself. "He could fix anything. Said the secret wasn't in the tools, but in knowing how the pieces fit together." "Sounds like you know that secret." Amy finally looked up. A small spark of hope flickered in her chest. Someone saw her. Someone understood. Captain Miller didn't say anything more. He just gave her a small, knowing smile and walked away. The brief conversation filled her with new determination. She knew she couldn't rely on anyone else to fight her battles. She had to prove her worth on her own. She started to train at night after everyone else was asleep. She'd go to a small, secluded field on the edge of the base where no one would see her. Under the pale moonlight, she'd practice with the bazooka. The weapon felt like a part of her body. She knew its weight, its balance, and its power. She wasn't just training. She was becoming one with the weapon, a single, unstoppable force. One night, a major issue hit the base. The main generator, a massive old beast that powered the barracks and the motor pool, suddenly gave out. Without it, half the base was dead. The official mechanics, a team of men who had been to technical school, were stumped. They looked at the wires and the gears and shook their heads. Thorne, trying to impress the officers, offered to help. But he was no mechanic. He was all talk and no skill. He just stood there looking at the generator, pretending to know what he was doing. Amy, her hands covered in grease from her nightly training, saw the problem at once. A small, crucial part was broken. It was a simple fix, one her father had taught her when she was a little girl. She quietly slipped into the motor pool, grabbed a replacement part, and went to work. She fixed the generator in a little under an hour, her hands moving with speed and precision. The lights flickered back on, and the base roared back to life. No one saw her do it. She didn't want the credit. She just wanted to help. But the next morning, Thorne, with a proud grin, told the base commander that he had been the one to find the problem. He spun a tale of a long, difficult night of work, and the commander, relieved to have the power back on, didn't question it. Amy watched him, her heart sinking. The injustice was a familiar ache, but this time it was deeper. It wasn't just about her. It was about her hard work being stolen, her sacrifice being forgotten. Thorne was once again getting the credit she deserved. The weight of his lie was almost unbearable, but she kept her mouth shut. She knew her time would come. The fire of resolve within her was burning brighter than ever before. She just had to wait for the right moment to let it show. That moment was coming, and it was going to be big. The base commander just announced that a special elite bazooka team was being formed for a new top-secret mission, and they were holding tryouts. This was her chance. She just had to survive the next few days. The news of the elite bazooka team tryout swept through Camp Shelby like a wildfire. This wasn't just another drill. This was a chance to prove one's worth and be part of something big. The mission was whispered to be a crucial part of the war effort, a direct challenge against German armor in the coming fight in Europe. The stakes were high, and so was the tension. Sergeant Thorne was more arrogant than ever. He swaggered around the barracks, his chest puffed out, telling everyone he was a shoo-in. "They need the best, and there's only one best around here," he'd say, staring right at Amy. The other soldiers, still loyal to him, would chuckle, and the mockery continued. But this time it didn't sting as much. Amy knew what she was capable of. She had her own kind of confidence, a quiet, powerful knowledge of her own skills that no amount of words could shake. The tryouts were brutal. They were designed to test not just skill, but endurance and problem-solving under pressure. The first part was a long march, carrying the heavy bazooka and ammunition. Then came a series of simulated targets at different ranges, some moving, some hidden. The final test was a timed run through a difficult obstacle course, where they had to stop and fire at a series of targets. Thorne was good, no doubt about it. He was fast, strong, and his shots were precise. He hit every target, but his moves were jerky, full of a kind of angry energy. He was trying too hard, showing off. Amy, on the other hand, was a study in calm. She moved with a purpose, her steps measured, her body a picture of fluid motion. She handled the heavy weapon as if it were a natural part of her, her movements smooth and efficient. Every time she took a shot, she was deliberate, calm, and accurate. She was a true master of the weapon. Midway through the obstacle course, a terrible thing happened. As Thorne was about to fire at a target, the bazooka's firing mechanism jammed. He pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. He pulled again and the lever stuck. He panicked. His face turned a deep red and he started to shout, kicking at the weapon in frustration. He was stuck, his time ticking away, his chance to be on the elite team slipping away. Without a second thought, Amy stepped forward. She didn't say a word. She just walked over to him, her eyes on the weapon. Thorne looked at her, stunned. He expected a taunt, a snide comment, a moment of revenge. But she just knelt beside him, her hands reaching for the bazooka. "Give it to me, Thorne," she said, her voice low and steady. He hesitated for a second, then handed it over. Amy took the weapon. Her fingers moved like a surgeon's. She saw the problem at once. A small piece of grit had gotten into the firing pin. She used a small, sharp tool from her pocket, cleaned the piece, and with a quick, practiced flick, the lever clicked back into place. She handed the bazooka back to him. "It's ready," she said. Thorne stared at her, his jaw hanging open. He was saved. He quickly took aim and fired, hitting the target just in time. The officers, who had been watching the whole time, were silent. They had seen the whole thing. They saw Thorne's panic, and they saw Amy's calm, selfless action. When the tryouts were over, the base commander stepped forward. "The results are in," he said, his voice echoing across the field. "The top bazooka operator is Private First Class Carter." A shocked murmur went through the crowd of soldiers. Thorne was stunned. Then Captain Miller stepped forward. "I have something to add," he said, his voice clear and strong. "Sergeant Thorne, I commend your effort. But I believe you owe Private Carter a debt of gratitude. Not only did she save your chances today, but she was also the one who fixed the generator for the entire base last week. She didn't want the credit. She just did the job right." The truth was out. Thorne's face went white. The soldiers who had laughed at Amy now looked at her with a new kind of respect. Thorne finally looked at her, not with anger, but with a deep, crushing shame. The mockery was gone, replaced by a painful truth. She had not only proven her skill, she had shown her character. The bazooka was a tool of war, but her real strength was her honor and her willingness to help even a rival. Amy had earned her place on the elite team. And as for Sergeant Thorne, his public humiliation was a bitter pill. But he had learned a hard lesson, a lesson he would never forget. The mission was to take out a heavily armored German tank in the French countryside. It was a dangerous, high-stakes operation. The elite bazooka team was sent to the front lines, and they were all on edge. The team was made up of the best soldiers from Camp Shelby, including Amy and, much to everyone's surprise, Sergeant Thorne. The officers had decided that Thorne, having proven his skills and having learned a valuable lesson in humility, was still a useful member of the team. The tension between him and Amy was a living, breathing thing. They didn't speak to each other. Thorne was quiet, withdrawn. The loud-mouthed man everyone knew was gone, replaced by a soldier who was sober and focused. They were dropped behind enemy lines and had to make their way to a small, hidden village where the German tank was stationed. The journey was long and tiring. They moved at night, through thick woods and over muddy fields, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and distant fires. Amy, now a quiet leader in the group, was at the front, her eyes constantly scanning the shadows. She was calm, focused, and her knowledge of the terrain and their mission was absolute. The rest of the team looked to her for guidance. They saw her strength, not just in handling the bazooka, but in her unshakable demeanor. The mockery was long gone. Now they were a team, a small unit of soldiers with one goal. Thorne at first kept his distance, But as the hours turned into days, he started to watch her. He saw how she cared for her weapon, how she checked on the other soldiers, how she never complained. The man who had once seen her as a joke now saw her as a leader. One day, they came across a patrol of German soldiers. The Germans were on a road a half-mile away. The Bazooka team had to hide quickly. They found a ditch and settled in, waiting for the patrol to pass. But then an awful sound came from the woods, a low moan. One of their men, Private Jones, had twisted his ankle in a rabbit hole and was in terrible pain. He couldn't walk. The sound was muffled, but if the Germans got any closer, they would hear it. The team was in a terrible position. They couldn't leave him, but they couldn't stay either. Amy looked at Thorne. He looked at her, his face grim. Thorne knew what had to be done. He had to create a distraction. He whispered his plan to Amy, a risky move that would expose him to the Germans. He was ready to make the sacrifice. But Amy shook her head. She had a better idea. She knew the bazooka better than anyone. She could use its power and the shape of the terrain to create a diversion that would lead the Germans away without risking any of their lives. It was an incredibly brave and dangerous idea, but it was the only way to save their comrade and their mission. She crawled to a small hillock, leaving the rest of the team in the ditch. Thorne watched her go, a new kind of fear gripping his heart. He saw her courage, her selflessness. It was a kind of bravery he had never known. She took aim at a distant ridge. She didn't fire at the Germans. She fired at a large boulder on the ridge. The rocket hit the rock with a terrific bang, a sound that echoed through the woods like a thunderclap. The Germans, startled and confused, changed their course. They thought the sound was an artillery strike and veered away from their location to investigate. The team was safe. But just as the last German soldier passed, a sniper in the trees fired a shot. The bullet hit Amy. She cried out in pain, her body slumping to the ground. Thorne, forgetting everything else, scrambled out of the ditch and ran to her. He knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he checked her wound. It was a bad one, a clean shot to her upper arm. She was in terrible pain, but she was alive. Thorne looked at her, his eyes filled with a new kind of emotion, not just respect, but a deep sense of gratitude and admiration. He had once looked down on her, and now she had saved him, and the entire team, with her quick thinking and her brave sacrifice. The roles were reversed. He was no longer the arrogant leader. He was just a man, humbled and in debt to a woman who was braver and smarter than he could ever hope to be. The mission was a success, but Amy's fate was unknown. Thorne and the team carried her to safety. He knew that if she died, he would be a part of it. He would never forgive himself. He had to see her get the justice she deserved. Thorne and the team carried Amy through the dark woods. He felt a deep, cold fear he had never known. The woman he had mocked and belittled for so long was now wounded, and it was because she had saved him and the entire team. He held her tight, his hand pressing a clean cloth against her arm to stop the bleeding. The pain was etched on her face, but she never complained. She was a silent, strong rock even in her weakest moment. The team was quiet. No one spoke. The sound of their breathing and their boots on the wet ground was all that could be heard. They reached a field hospital just as the sun began to rise. A nurse and a doctor took Amy from them, their movements swift and professional. Thorne stood there watching her disappear behind a tent flap. He felt lost, empty. The man who had been full of swagger and noise was gone. Now he was just a quiet, fearful soldier, hoping for a miracle. He waited outside the tent for hours, not speaking to anyone. The other soldiers from his team tried to talk to him, but he just shook his head. He had to know. He had to know if she was all right. After what felt like a lifetime, the doctor came out. He looked tired, but relieved. "She's going to be fine," he said. "A clean shot. The bullet went right through her upper arm. She'll have a scar, but she'll live." A wave of relief, so powerful it made Thorne's knees weak, washed over him. He felt like he could finally breathe again. He went to see her. She was lying on a cot, her arm wrapped in bandages, her face pale. She smiled at him, a tired, weak smile. "We saved the mission," she said. Thorne shook his head. You saved the mission, Amy. And you saved me. Thorne sat beside her, and for the first time he spoke from the heart. He told her everything. He told her how stupid he had been, how his own fear of being replaced had made him act like a bully. He told her how he had mocked her for a weakness that wasn't even there, while he had been the weak one all along. He confessed to his own smallness, his own jealousy. "I'm sorry, Amy," he said, his voice cracking. "I was wrong about everything." Amy just looked at him, her eyes soft with understanding. "I know," she said. "We all have to find our way in life. Sometimes it's a hard path." Weeks later, Amy was back at Camp Shelby. Her arm was still in a sling, but she was smiling. The war was still going on, but the feeling at the base had changed. The respect she had earned on the battlefield and in the tryouts had spread. Now, when she walked through the camp, soldiers would nod to her, their faces filled with respect. Thorne, for his part, was a different man. He was no longer Sergeant Thorne, the loudmouth bully. He was just Thorne, a quiet, focused soldier who followed Amy's lead. Then, one day, the base commander called for a special meeting. All the soldiers gathered in the main field. It was a formal ceremony with officers and dignitaries. Amy was told to stand at the front. Thorne stood next to her, his shoulders straight, his eyes fixed on the commander. The commander spoke of the Bazooka team's mission and of their courage and success. Then he spoke of Amy. "Private First Class Carter," he said, his voice ringing with pride, "showed an extraordinary level of skill and bravery. But she also showed us something even more important. She showed us what true character looks like." But then an even more surprising thing happened. The commander paused and looked at Sergeant Thorne. "Sergeant Thorne, do you have something to add?" Thorne, without hesitation, stepped forward. He looked at the hundreds of soldiers, at Amy, at the officers. He took a deep breath. He spoke of the tryouts, of his jammed weapon, of Amy's calm, silent help. He spoke of the night in the woods, of Private Jones's twisted ankle, of his own fear and Amy's quick thinking. "I was ready to risk my life to save the mission," Thorne said, his voice now strong and clear. "But Private Carter used her mind and her skill to save everyone without a single loss. She is not just a soldier, she is a true hero. I was. A man full of pride and arrogance, but she was a woman full of honor and sacrifice. I owe her everything." The crowd was silent. Then, slowly at first, a single soldier began to clap, then another, and another. Soon, the entire field was a storm of applause. It was not just for her skill with the bazooka, it was for her character, her quiet strength. Amy stood there, a small, humble figure in the middle of a storm of sound, her eyes filled with tears. She had earned it all. Not just the respect of a few men, but the respect of an entire army base. She had gone from being a figure of mockery to a symbol of courage and honor. The bazooka was a tool of victory, but her spirit was the true weapon. As for Thorne, he had his own redemption. He had finally faced the truth, told the truth, and in doing so had earned a new kind of respect, the respect of a man who was no longer a boy pretending to be a soldier, but a true man. His debt was paid, and their story was no longer one of conflict, but of shared respect and a powerful, enduring friendship.